Well, good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to SBAM's Small Business Briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications, and today I am joined by Kelly Saunders. Welcome back to the show, Kelly.
Thanks, Sarah. Again, I'm Kelly Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement here at SBAM, filling in for Brian Callie today, and it's always a pleasure to be with you.
All right, I do want to take a minute to welcome one of our newest members, Jordan Fuller. Jordan owns Summit Street Shop, which is a gift shop in Weberville. So welcome, Jordan, and your team. We appreciate your membership. Kelly, you've invited a special guest to join us to continue a discussion that Brian began last week regarding an economic development package. So I'm going to turn it over to you for this conversation.
Yes, I'm very excited having one of our great partners and a personal friend of mine, Lindsay Case-Palsrok from Business Leaders for Michigan. SBM works with numerous business organizations in Lansing to advance similar policy issues that we care about. And so Lindsay and I work together quite often on numerous different policy issues, but we've invited her on today to talk about the economic development package, as Sarah mentioned, that Brian introed a little bit last week, Thursday. But we're really going to break it down. But first, Lindsay, welcome to the show. We'd invite you to introduce yourself, your title at Business Leaders for Michigan, and maybe just tell us a little bit about what Business Leaders for Michigan does in Michigan.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Thanks so much for the invitation to join today. I am Lindsay Case-Palsrok. I am the Vice President of Government Affairs at Business Leaders for Michigan, and we are the state's business roundtable. For anyone that's familiar with the National Business Roundtable, our board is comprised of the largest CEOs or the CEOs of the largest companies in the state. We have around 100, a little bit over that, board members. And we were founded about 14 years ago with the goal of making Michigan a top 10 state. So while we are a business organization, we don't focus as much on individual member company issues as we do what is the broad set of policies when it comes to economic development, growing jobs, taxation, business climate, education attainment, et cetera, that will make Michigan competitive and make Michigan a top 10 state to grow population, grow jobs, and grow median incomes. So that's a little bit about BLM. BLM is our initials, obviously. And I've been there a few years now, and I really enjoy working with Kelly and the whole team at SBM.
Yeah, thanks for laying that out, Lindsay. And so Business Leaders for Michigan has been such a great partner to SBAM because of all the educational content that you talked about, sharing that data, learning what other states do in order to make sure that Michigan is on the right track. We can obviously come up with our own ideas here and implement them from a policy angle, but there's a lot of great things that happen around the country. And so building off of other people's policy ideas that they put forth and put into action has been really helpful, obviously, as we put things in front of the legislature that we feel like, you know, small business and big business can benefit from and how we can work better together. So Lindsay, diving into this economic development package, you've been working really hard on numerous pieces specifically of this package, and we've talked about it on this program. Governor Whitmer put it in her State of the State. But can you maybe talk about, in general, the economic development package? There's 4 different pieces of it that we've talked about here, not in depth, but why is an economic development package so important to Michigan right now in this moment before we dive into maybe 2 of those specific issues?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. In general, this package is about our incentive toolbox. So we know that we are in a highly competitive landscape with other states, whether that is to bring new companies and new jobs here, or frankly, to retain the ones we have, or for those that we have located here to want to grow here and stay here. So out of the 4 tools in this toolbox that the bill package is centered around, I know, again, you've talked about them briefly before. We've got a bill package around expanding Renaissance zones in the state. There's a bill package around making some changes to Michigan's cash closing fund, also known as SOAR. You may have heard of it, but this is the fund that helps land these big steel on the ground, capital intensive transformational projects. And then the other 2, which I think we'll talk more about today, are tools that top states have, frankly, all states have, and Michigan doesn't. A lot of that's because we do something called the Michigan 180 here, which means every time we change political leaderships or parties that are in leadership, we tend to want to abort policies and pick a new direction or a new shiny set of tools, when in general, top states keep tools like this, the R&D tax credit and the payroll tax credit, higher, that we're going to talk about today, in place for decades at a time, or our competitors have had these tools for decades. So we're trying to get them stood up to make sure we can just basically be in the game to compete with these basic incentive tools that other states have.
Great. And we've also, highlighted how the legislature is a little bit complicated right now. We obviously have a tie in the House, as far as waiting for those special elections to happen again in April. And you've been working with Democrats and Republicans to try to find consensus. And we have alongside you too with these two specific pieces we're going to talk about. So let's talk about R&D, research and development, something that you had invited us to the table and about, in which was, how do we make research and development tax credit available to all businesses in Michigan, small and big alike, so that it's industry agnostic. And so could you dive in just a little bit more on what the R&D tool is and why it's important to this toolkit?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, when we talk about benchmarking other states, only 13 states, we're one of 13 states in the country that does not have an R&D tax credit that looks like this. There's a federal R&D tax credit, and this tax credit that's proposed and sitting right now in the Senate, passed out of the House along bipartisan lines, mirrors the federal tax credit. So it's very simple. The eligibility requirements are well understood by companies, but there's also some things in there, I think, particularly for small business, to like, there's a portion of the appropriation to get this pot of money started for this tax credit that's dedicated specifically to small business. That wasn't the case in previous iterations. And again, we really fought hard, and SBM was by our side on this, to make sure the administration of this is super clean and easy. This is a treasury administered tax credit. This is not a certification process, a subjective process. This is, you meet the criteria as mirrored by federal eligibility. You submit your tax forms and you receive the credit. Now, the total fund is capped at this point. That means there's only so much money, but that number we hope to grow over the years. But really, it was important for us to get the structure of this right, which is simple, easy to administer, and have, again, a special place in there for small business to be able to capture at least a subset of those funds.
Yeah, we're really obviously excited about it here at SBAM, and we saw it pass out of the House at the end of last year. It's currently sitting in the Senate. And so let's talk about the higher piece of this package, and then maybe we'll crystal ball some things at the end. But talk to us about higher. Brian talked about it being a payroll, tax capture, but maybe just a little bit more in depth about why this is important. And then we'll talk a little bit also about how we're trying to get that number down so it's more accessible to small businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So higher is the new name for something very similar to what we had in the years of 2017 and 2019 in Michigan, called Good Jobs for Michigan. And there's a lot of, sorry, one second. Maxwell, shh. Sorry, this is a school day.
And this is a family-friendly program, so it's okay.
I was hopeful, but yeah, it's President's Day, so I have children in the home. But yeah, so this is sometimes called a job creation tax credit, a payroll tax credit, a tax capture. But in general, 43 other states besides Michigan have a tool like this. And what the tool does is a few things. Number one, it allows companies that are going to expand new jobs, whether they're already located here or not, in Michigan, to be able to capture, or the state captures that income tax portion of those new jobs, and then sort of rebates that to the employer once they've proven that the jobs requirements have been met via W-2, et cetera. Treasury kind of just sets those monies aside. So nothing ever flows through the general fund. The state doesn't have to spend any money. But the good jobs of Good Jobs for Michigan, are now higher, which is high income regional employment, is about a wage floor that exists legislatively. Oftentimes there's a pretty big amount of discretion at MEDC around awards. And this tool says you have to be at a certain percentage of median income for the type of pay, the amount of pay for these jobs for them to qualify for this tax capture. So there is no industry specific piece here. There's no picking of winners and losers related to industry, but there is a quality control around the income floor in which the new job has to qualify for. So I'll stop there for a second, Kelly, if you want to expand further, keep going, happy to.
Yes. So as you can hear, Lindsay talking about those thresholds and trying to get these things lowered so that it is accessible to our membership specifically. Specifically with a higher package, I believe, Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, they were looking at 50 jobs added, correct?
Yeah, so that's what I didn't mention. There's sort of two qualifiers. One is how much does this job pay, and two, how many jobs are you adding? And Good Jobs for Michigan was really a tool that before SOAR, that cash closing fund, was meant to try to do these transformational big deals. The tiers were 50, 500 jobs and 3,000 jobs, and the income requirements adjusted. Right now in the version in the Senate, that floor is 50 jobs. 50 new jobs at X percent of the median income, or 100, and these numbers are a little bit fluid depending on which version you're looking at. And the House version actually is 25 new jobs. So again, 25 jobs is not insignificant, but at least this is a tool that for your membership, Kelly, at least is quasi-relevant to the conversation versus those 500 and 3,000 threshold of prior.
Yeah,
versions.
we were really encouraged to have those conversations and to talk about what it means for small business to add, 25 or fewer jobs. That's even a little bit of pushing it for a lot of our members. But if you're branching out and starting, a growth opportunity in a different community where you might hire 10 to 25 jobs, we'd like to see it down to 10, but we understand that there's some negotiating to be done here. That's possible for our membership. And so being seated at the table together and talking about those numbers with legislative leaders and being able to negotiate and tell the story has really been effective. And so us working together to say, we really want to make sure that if people want to work for a big business, that they can, but also our small business owners that are seeking to put, more energy to our communities, and they can at this level that has just as much value. And so we really feel like our advocacy and our education, that the conversations we're having with legislators are making a difference. And so it's been nice to work together and tell that story side by side to strengthen, wherever you live in Michigan, wherever you work, whoever you work for, that there's a place for you to have access to economic development tools. So, Lindsay, let's round out this conversation by saying, you specifically have been leading the charge, shepherding this in, through the House and the Senate. If you had a crystal ball, where are we at with this? And what do you think is going to happen in the next, even few weeks or even few months about where this could land? Because I know from the business community standpoint, we'd love to see these tools, hit the ground running. And we know that the governor wants that too. But what are we looking at in the legislature?
Well, I'll look at my optimistic crystal ball, which is one that says we're going to make a really, really big push to get these, to the governor by spring break. So that's in March, early April. I'm not going to say that's a slam dunk, but I will say that the policy changes that we've made to these bills, and that was a process that SBAM has been part of, Business Leaders for Michigan, along with other business partners, to really create more sound policy that looks like best practices look in other states, but also again to make it more small business friendly, et cetera. We've got good bipartisan support. Some of the leadership dynamics, particularly in that House with that 50-54, 54-54 split, are challenging. It doesn't matter what you're talking about, what kind of thing you're working on, frankly, they're just challenging. So we're going to keep pushing. We think that our grassroots lobbying efforts, which is just educate the members on the soundness of the policy, is working. And we're going to keep pushing. So let's just say optimistically, we're hopeful in the next few months here we can have these to the governor's desk.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Lindsay. Our membership likes to hear about policy and know where we're at, and also to hear from our partners too. So we'll look forward to hopefully getting this across the finish line, and we'll invite you back to take a victory lap at that time. But thanks for being with us today.
Great. Thank you so much for the invite. Have a great one.
All right. Yes. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Kelly. It was great to kind of flesh out a little bit of what Brian highlighted for us last Thursday, and also spotlight some of the work that we're doing with partners on behalf of our members. I think it's really important that people understand the work that we do, Kelly, that you do really in advocacy, and it's partners like Business Leaders for Michigan who help us make all of this possible. I do have a couple of other discussion points around state policy for you. Last week, the Senate Labor Committee took up a bill that are around new requirements regarding prevailing wage law. So can you give us an update on that?
Yes, I'd say happy to, but when we get to prevailing wage, this gets complicated for us. A reminder that when Democrats took over the legislature last year, or I should say, two of their priority areas were to repeal right to work and the prevailing wage law, which they did. And actually, the governor signed it, and it was fully repealed as of last week, which means we, go back to not having a right to work and the prevailing wage law being in place. So Democrats are now looking to take it a step further. This is something that they fully believe in. And in Senate Labor last week, they had a hearing on Senate Bill 571, which essentially would toughen and expand Michigan's prevailing wage law, requiring construction companies to register with and pay fees to the state, adding private renewable energy projects for those covered by this law that would be passed. So what does that mean? The law mandates essentially higher wages and benefits for workers on state financed construction projects, such as school buildings and items like that. And then we just obviously went over that this does make it tougher because of the repeal of right to work and prevailing wage. So contractors could not bid on a work on a prevailing wage job without having a state registration. And the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity would charge an annual fee that is not spelled out in the legislation's current form. So there are pieces in this legislation that are still, I'll say, being worked on, but they were taking testimony essentially to, gauge the waters on if this would be something that people would want. So contractors who currently must maintain certified payroll records for prevailing wage jobs would have to transmit them to applicable government agencies before April 1st of 2025. And then on or after that date, they would be required to put the records in a newly created state database that would be open to the public to view and show information about projects in each worker's classification, wages, and hours worked. So we're also seeing an expansion of government if this law were passed. So this is just taking that prevailing wage another step further. And for us, it's twofold, right? We don't really want to see an expansion of government in the sense that it creates more burdensome red tape. It also is another layer for businesses to have to pay and enter into a system in state government, and essentially says that smaller companies, smaller members like ours need not apply because they just can't meet these requirements. And so for us, it's disappointing to see something like this be brought forward. And so another key component of this that is interesting, obviously, you've heard me talk in exasperation about the energy legislation that was passed this past year that we also opposed. Under this law, this would bring solar and wind facilities under the scope of the prevailing wage law, regardless of whether they are funded privately or publicly. And so this is just something that we are obviously going to have to be more intentional about with the Senate Labor Committee specifically about why we oppose this type of legislation. It's starting to get so restrictive, and unfortunately for our members becomes difficult. And so we will continue to watch it and keep you updated, but just putting that piece of legislation on your radar. If you happen to be in your communities and see your legislators, bring this to their attention and say that you do not support it. And you can always feel free to contact SBAM for more information. Again, Senate Bill 571 in front of Senate Labor Committee.
All right, well, thanks for that update there. And like Kelly said, we will keep everyone posted as to how that turns out. All right, so our primary election is next week. It's next Tuesday. We've talked a little bit on the program about the primary election, how it has been moved up, and some of the high profile visits here in Michigan. But I think it might be helpful to offer our viewers some practical information regarding the election because there have been some changes. So can you just go through an overview, kind of the who, what, when, why, how of voting?
Yes, so obviously, being in the center of Lansing, we take all aspects of government seriously. In my previous life, I worked for the Department of State, and elections were like my baby for a long time. And so I'm just interested in this topic altogether. But as you recall, we passed some new voting laws, and so we have early voting, and that is very different. But as of this past Saturday, you can now early vote and not just absentee vote in Michigan. And so that's for the first time in statewide elections ever. And so it's kind of hard to navigate or understand, what does that mean for me? You know, people who absentee vote versus, now I can early vote. Do I go in person? Do I send it in the mail? And it can be a little bit cumbersome. So we're going to break it down for you. So the ballot initiative that was passed in 2022 makes it required for municipalities in Michigan to hold at least 9 days of early voting in their respective communities. And so for Michigan's presidential primary, that would begin this past Saturday all the way through February 25th at your local clerk's office or maybe somewhere else that's been designated, because as Sarah said, our presidential primary is next week, Tuesday. So what exactly is early voting? Early voting is what it sounds like. It is a registered voters can visit an early voting location, fill out their ballots, and then cast them before Election Day. For voters who want to cast their ballots in person, but may have time constraints on Election Day, or maybe they, just flat out can't show up that day and they don't want to vote by mail, it's another option. And so you can visit basically the Secretary of State's website, the Michigan Voting Information Center. You can put in your information and it will pop up where you need to go and vote. So how is it different from absentee voting? So while Michigan offers absentee voting, early voting is different for a few reasons. Unlike with absentee ballots, in early voting location, ballots are placed directly into the tabulator. So wherever your location is that you can vote early, it's like just on Election Day. You walk in, they have voting booths set up, you fill out your ballot, and you go to the tabulator and you put it in. Absentee voting is you can send it in the mail and they essentially put it in for you. However, if you're not present that day and your ballot is spoiled, that means that your ballot does not count. So this is also another way for you to make sure that your ballot goes in the tabulator and it's counted. So those are the differences. And for people, they're like, I don't get it. I don't understand how this is different. Essentially, those 9 days ahead of time, if you prefer to fill it out and go in and see your ballot, I like to see my ballot go in and make sure it's counted. That's the way to do it. But if you are absentee voter and send it in by mail and you want the clerk to do it for you, that's another option too. So that's the expansion and the difference basically. So from last Saturday through the 25th, go to the Michigan Secretary of State's website, find out where your early voting is, because it won't necessarily be the same as your poll that you normally would go to on Election Day. You may go and cast your ballot early, or feel free to send it in via mail or vote on the day of. So many options.
So many options. I know I received a postcard in the mail, I don't know, maybe about a month or so ago, letting me know about this new option and where I could go to do my early voting. And, maybe I'll be wild and crazy and check that out here this week and do it ahead of time. So thanks for that report, Kelly. All right, now speaking of reports, different kind of report, let's talk about lobbying reports. We are a lobbying organization. We have certain requirements that we have to comply with. And one of those is submitting details to the Secretary of State twice a year. So there was a new reporting period and we have some new details that just came out. So what can you tell us about those reports?
Yes, so we have to report how if we spend money, essentially lobbying legislators 2 times a year, once at the end of January and once at the end of August. And as we said, Democrats took over the legislature for the first time in 40 years last year. And so Lansing looked a lot different. And for lobbyists, it looks a lot different too. Some people tend to, whatever party's in power, spend more time with them than the other. And this was quite a swing. So registered lobbyists do have to report to the state government. And this time there was a reported spending of $52.9 million in 2023 lobbying legislators. And that's a new record as Democrats, like I said, took over the legislature for the first time in 40 years. So new disclosures from registered lobbyists showed their reported spending increasing nearly 20% over the last 2 years, more than $8 million and a roughly $2.9 million increase from 2022. So that's interesting. I will say that while 270 groups reported spending more than $800,000 on food and drink for officials, just 10 groups accounted for more than half of that. And I will say, while I've got some thoughts on this, SBM will not be anywhere near the top of that list. We are not that kind of lobbying organization. We fully believe in education and meeting with people in their offices. Not that we don't occasionally get together and have coffee, but I'll just say that is an incredible increase as people try to build relationships. We here at SBRAM try to do our best to represent you well. And so while that might be disconcerting to some, I'd say disconcerting to some of us here at SBM as well. That's a lot of money going towards the state capitol these days.
That's an understatement. That's an understatement. All right, let's finish up with a warning that recently came out of the Attorney General's office about a tax scam.
Yeah, so pretty much last week, Thursday, right after you and Brian got off the small business briefing, the Attorney General sent out a statewide warning against scammers trying to steal tax refunds. We're obviously in the middle of tax season, and as we can see, scammers are just getting more and more smart as we move along here. And so it can be really scary and terrifying and confusing for people. And so as you move forward in filing your taxes, just wanted to flag this for you. So Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel is issuing a scam alert, essentially. There is an email going out under her name, but it's also says Attorney Dana Nessel, not Michigan Attorney General. And it uses broken language. It is a Gmail account. And so if you see something like this, please make sure to report it. But just a few things to remind yourself of as you see things come in your email inbox or in the mail. The IRS will never demand immediate payment, demand payment without any chance to appeal or dispute the amount due, threaten to have you arrested, require payment in the form of a gift card, prepaid debit card, or wire transfer, or call, text, or email you and ask you for your personal or financial information. And so the Attorney General's office just said, please be diligent, make sure that you're checking the email address, make sure that you know that the IRS would not demand those things on the spot, specifically in those categories that I just mentioned. And that if you do receive something like that, to send it to the Attorney General's office to make sure that they can flag it and follow up to catch these folks. And Sarah, this might be a good time to also bring up that SBM has numerous tools in our toolbox to help with cybersecurity. If you might want to go over where folks can find that on our website.
Yes, I'll go ahead and drop the link, but if you go to our member benefits tab, there's a whole Be Protected section. And so we offer tools that kind of help you understand your risk. Like how risky is your, are your cyber issues? We have insurance products, and I really recommend taking a look and finding out how we can help you. I also recommend sharing with your team this tax scam information, because obviously this is going to hit people at an individual level as well. And so any kind of, information you can provide them will certainly help people not get taken for this scam. So again, sbam.org/member benefits/be protected. Again, cyber insurance and our Ask an Expert and more. So lots of tools there for you. I think that is everything we had for today, right, Kelly? Okay.
It is. Yeah, thanks
Okay,
for
a
letting me
full
join
show.
you.
We're glad you could join us today. Brian and I will be back here Thursday at 3 p.m. We have a special guest from Blue Cross, so please join us then. Have a great week.
Have a great week, everybody.